Hey, welcome to Lord of the Board. My name is Sam, and today we are going to be talking about Root, the Homeland Expansion. Now, this is actually going to be the fourth expansion to Root the board game. And I'm not going to go into what Root the board game is. It's the best game in the world. It's my favorite game of all time. I have a ton of content surrounding the game. So if you're interested in Root, just go watch any of those videos. I'll probably link a few to this video here. But this is the fourth major expansion to the game. There's been some other smaller expansions like decks and hireling packs and meeples. But when I say major expansion, I'm talking the big boxes. So first we had the Riverfolk expansion, which came with lizards and otters, Riverfolk Company and Lizard Cult. Then we had the Underground expansion, which was Underground Duchy. We also had the Corvid Conspiracy come in that. And also two new maps, the Lake and the Mountain map. Then we got the Marauders expansion, which we were thinking, wow, I didn't think it could get bigger with these expansions, because then we get the Badgers, or the Keepers in Iron, and the Rats, the Lord of the Hundreds, along with a whole slew of a different way to play the game with hirelings and advanced setup, a lot of cool content. And then Homeland comes into play and is like, hey, this expansion is going to have 3 factions, not 2. Every other expansion has had 2, but we're going to have 3. We're also going to give you 2 maps. And on top of that, we're also going to give some extra components so that if you get this expansion and you have the base game, you could theoretically play 2 games of Root at the same time with dice and more items to play with. This is a expansion that is just jam-packed with a ton of stuff, so I'm super excited to talk about it with you today. This is going to come with the Lily Pad Diaspora, which are frogs and toads. It's going to come with the Twilight Council, which are, primarily bats. And then you've got the Knaves of the Deep Wood, which are a new faction that can kind of be played instead of the Vagabond. So you can't have both Vagabond and Knaves in the same game. This is a group of skunks led by 3 Vagabonds. So a cool twist on that faction. And then we've got 2 new maps, being the Gorge and also the Marsh map. The Marsh map basically allowing you to play at higher player counts, or really any map can be played at 5 and 6, but this map was built to be played at 5 and 6 with a way to have more clearings. So typical clearing count is 12, but the Marsh map has 15. So I think I've said kind of a good enough preface of everything that comes in the expansion, but before we dive into talking about how all this all works, I do want to say that I was actually a part of this expansion in a small way. I was the designer of one half of the map. I designed the Gorge map. If you're interested in that story or information about the Gorge map in general and how that all happened, I do have a video, and I'll go ahead and link it up here and also down below if you're interested in learning about that. But go into this video knowing that I am a huge fan of this game. I am a part of this expansion. So there's really not a way that this expansion could have been amiss for me, if that makes sense. But hope you enjoy this, and I hope that this is helpful anyways. So let's get right in, and we're going to talk about how all of this works. We're going to start with the 3 factions. So we've got the Lily Pad Diaspora, which are the Diaspora frogs. They're coming in from the outside of the woodland, and they're trying to integrate into the woodland, bringing their culture on the board. And the way that the game kind of frames that is that this faction has enclaves, which are just tokens, but these enclaves can be peaceful or militant. When they are peaceful, they are actually going to be giving their suit to a clearing. So if a clearing is mouse and it has a peaceful enclave in it, it is both a frog clearing and a mouse clearing at the same time, which is a concept that's like, what in the world? We've only ever had 3 clearing types, but now there are 4 when the frogs are in the game. The other thing is when these tokens are flipped to militant, which can happen in a couple of different ways, then that clearing is only frog. It covers up the other suit. So this can murky up a lot of factions' abilities to do things, but it also makes things very, very interesting, especially with the next mechanic that they introduce, which is the fact that they come with a deck of frog cards, and this frog card deck is actually added to the shared deck. So not only are you going to be drawing into all the standard suits, the 4 that you are, familiar with, the birds, the mice, the rabbits, and the foxes, but now you're going to be drawing into frog cards. They even have a different back so that you can tell when a frog card might be coming up on the deck. Maybe you want to start drawing more when you see that, if you get the opportunity. This also comes with a pond placard, because one of the main rules with this deck of cards is that when you discard these frog cards, they go into the pond instead of into the shared discard pile. That matters because now, new rule for everyone, if you're ever drawing cards, you can always take your first card from the pond. So you can get something that and kind of interact and integrate with the frogs on your own terms. It's a very, very cool mechanic, and just these two aspects, these two things that just come with the frogs, change the game for not just the frogs, but for everyone, and it changes literally everything. But in terms of how the Lilypad Diaspora actually operate and work, they basically are going to be doing a couple of things. So, like I said, they have to integrate into the woodlands. So they score points by having peaceful enclaves on the board. They're going to have an opportunity in evening to spend a card matching enclaves that are on the board in order to score that number. So if you had 3 peaceful bunny enclave tokens, you could spend a bunny to score 3 points. Now you can only do this once per turn, and you cannot do this with frog cards because that would be completely broken. But the main kind of crutch of this faction is that you really want the peaceful enclaves, but militant enclaves are how you actually get your warriors on the board. This is a militant faction at the end of the day, and so a lot of their job is going to be policing the other factions. And one thing that I love about this is that if you are attacked while you have a peaceful enclave at that clearing, that enclave, if it survives, is going to flip over to militant, and it will give you a warrior there. And then every clearing that the attacking faction is also sharing a space with your enclaves, those are also going to flip, and so it becomes this almost signal that kind of goes around the board. I like to imagine this thematically of the frogs being like, yo, the birds attacked us, and so they tell all of their frog friends that the birds are attacking, and so all of those peaceful enclaves sharing space with the birds are going to flip as well and get a warrior there. A really big boom of recruitment, and you can actually use this as a negotiation piece, which is really cool. But speaking of negotiations, there's literally a rule that the frogs come with called negotiations, which allows any other players, not the frogs, sharing a space with a militant enclave, they're able to just flip it to peaceful. However, if they do not rule the clearing after that flip, they have to give a card to the person who does. And this can be really helpful because a lot of factions really need clearings to not be just frog oftentimes. For example, if the Eyrie are trying to place their roost and they only have a fox build in there, and it used to be a fox, but now it's just a frog, they could theoretically flip that over and make it a frog and fox now to be able to place the roost. Or sympathy spreading as the Woodland Alliance, you might want to flip a couple, that way you can spend some of that support in order to get the sympathy on the board. There are tons and tons of options. Some of the crazy interactions with this faction and others, just a small example would be the Corvid Conspiracy, who can spend a frog card to get a Corvid warrior at every clearing that is either militant frog or peaceful frog. It doesn't matter. They get one at every. I mean, we've had games where they're getting a recruitment of 1 frog and they get 8 dudes on the board, or 7 dudes. It's amazing. Or 5. It's just so good. It's so good. It's so fun. It's so interesting. And so these frogs really do create and add a very, very cool dynamic to your table. But there are still 2 other factions. I know this seems bonkers that this is just one of the 3, but there are 2 other factions that are also adding some stuff. So let's move on to the Twilight Council. The Twilight Council is trying to bring about a new initiative into the woodland. They're saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't have all of this war. Maybe we should be more on terms with, the peacekeeping side of things. And the way that the game represents this is that they actually have what are called assemblies. And these assemblies can be closed or governing assemblies. Now, when they're closed, they're just a token. But if they are governing other players' tokens or buildings, that is how the bats score points. So they want these governing buildings in areas with enemy pieces. But the thing about the governing part that really sucks is that basically if a clearing is governed by one of these assemblies, nobody can do anything with their pieces in there except for move and battle. So you can't flip tokens, you can't craft, you can't place. It's all really, really rough. They are basically locking down clearings, basically making that clearing super boring with all of this structure. And so there is also another action that every player gets access to, which is called entreating. On their turn, an enemy can force an assembly to be closed. However, the Twilight Council player is going to gain a loyalist. We'll talk about those in a second, but the other option is that they can actually place all of their loyalists that they already have at that clearing with the closed assembly. Now your player board can actually hold 4 warriors from your supply, and they get a fancy little name called loyalists. You can gain them from various actions on your turn, or if an enemy entreats you like we were just discussing. You can also place loyalists in Birdsong with your assemble action. Now, when an enemy removes an assembly, you will have to remove 1 loyalist. And one of the keys to playing the Twilight Council well is keeping a good supply of these, but also putting them out onto the board when you get those chances to keep rule on the board, ensuring that your assemblies stay governing. The last thing that makes them super unique is the peacekeeping ability that they have, which means that whenever they are at a clearing with warriors, they're going to be defending alongside whoever is getting attacked in that clearing. So if there is a sawmill and it has a wood token there, and you have 3 bats there, well, that looks like free cardboard. However, if a player would attack the Marquise, the Cats, sawmill, and wood, your warriors are actually going to be taking those hits before the sawmill and the wood can be removed. This is a double-edged sword because oftentimes players can use this as a way to police the bats. However, it also means that you can protect those tokens because really what you're trying to do is get those governing assemblies at them. Now, the way that the Twilight Council actually work is actually kind of similar to, the Underground Duchy or the Lizard Cult, where they're going to be revealing cards to do actions. Oftentimes, they'll have the ability to move, battle, recruit, but then that's only the Birdsong portion. These cards can actually be used again in the evening, and it will actually basically make every card give double action. Now, there are ways to lose these cards if you do things that would get in the way of, staying peaceful. For example, battling at an assembly would have you lose the card that you used because that's not really in line with their goal as a faction. And also placing these assemblies, if you don't rule that clearing, you'd have to get rid of the card that you revealed as well. A very funny touch is that on their board during the daylight step, they only have one thing to do, and that is sleep. I really enjoy that. And in the evening, you've got kind of some of your more weird actions that are unique to the faction as well, like Banish, which is basically a battle, except no hits are dealt to or against you, and you're able to move their troops to a clearing, forcing them away. You're basically just banishing out your opponents, and you might want to do that because then you can rule easier those clearings so that you can have those open governed assemblies. I mean, if this faction sounds super rude and annoying, you are exactly right. They're one of those factions that's like, no, stop what you're doing. Let me handle this. And they end up creating complicated problems for everyone at the table. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I like them. They've also got a weird gambling mechanic called Empower. So if you had revealed a bird card in Birdsong, well, you can actually use that to empower in the evening when you put it back to your hand. You're going to roll a dice and then remove warriors from the clearing to that dice number. Now you can either put those warriors in your loyalist box, or if you still rule the clearing, you can score 1 point. So if you have a bunch of bats in a clearing, this is a way to get a couple extra points. And honestly, towards the end game, this is a really good way to extend your point count and do some of those crazy bursts from, the 20 range to the 30, or even honestly from 18 to 30. They can have a really good late game burst if well calculated and planned. So that's kind of the Twilight Council. They're just going to be plopping these assemblies down on the board, locking up clearings for other factions to not be able to do what they want, and then they're going to be trying to get them to govern clearings at enemy pieces in order to basically score points and suck the life out of every faction they touch. Which honestly is thematic to bats. They love to suck the life out of things. There we go. And then we've got the Knaves of the Deep Wood. Now this faction is wild because one, it cannot be played with the Vagabond because it really is kind of a optional replacement. So some tables may still love the Vagabond, they might still have them, but at the beginning you kind of have to choose one to have in your draft if you're doing advanced setup, or really you're just choosing one or the other if you're just playing a standard game of Root. But this faction is basically, you got 3 Vagabonds now, but they're leading a band of Skunks. Kind of think Robin Hood vibe. They're kind of stealing from the rich. They're kind of doing they're trying to put their acclaim down on the board and show, hey, we're so cool. Look what we're doing around the woodland. They're also going to be attacking other factions and taking their warriors as prisoners, hiding them into the forests in order to score points off of them as well. Now, this faction can move in and out of forests with their captains. This is regardless of rules, so they're really good at kind of getting away in a fight or coming out. Their kind of options of movement are really amazing, and at the beginning of each of their turns, they have to choose a captain to basically activate and use during that turn, so it kind of splits your focus in different areas of the board at each of your unique captains. Now, speaking a little bit about those captains, that's actually going to determine what items you have access to, because each of these captain cards is going to have 2 items linked to them. And while you look at what items you're going to have access to, you can take a look at your board because you have all of these item actions. These are going to be powerful actions that you can use on your turn by flipping over these items, similar to that of the Vagabond, but different. But using an item is just one action. You can also move, battle, or craft, which is called filching, and you can do any of these in any order up to 4 times. But back to that item economy, because this is very, very interesting. When you're actually flipping these are going to be flipped over and not used again until you basically come to a point called Take It Easy in Evening. And this only comes into full effect once you've used all 3 of your captains. So essentially every 3 turns, you're going to get access to all of the items that either you've collected or that were already in your stash. And so using those items needs to be done kind of sparingly, but also you need to be using them because that's really what makes you on par with other factions as well. So their main balance is trying to get those prisoners and also setting up their acclaim. Now, there are a lot of ways to place a claim with items, like your Revel with your teapots. You can place acclaims and get Skunks on the board, and a lot of these have that if there's already an acclaim there, you get kind of double the benefit. But there's also Gift. You can place a claim and draw a card, or Serve, place a claim and craft cards. But you also have placing a claim built into all of your attacks. Whenever you are attacking an enemy faction and you remove at least 1 warrior from them, you can take that 1 warrior and put it into an adjacent forest. We always like to set them down in order to denote whether we have them as prisoners or they're actually active in the game. And then at the end of the battle, if your captain is still in that clearing, you can place an acclaim there. Now, in Evening, you are going to get 1 victory point for every 2 prisoners and 1 victory point for every 2 acclaim on the board. But this faction doesn't have that many Skunks to work with. They really only have 10 Skunks. And so a lot of your game plan is really just being economic, and when you're using those items, using them at very specific times, and also trying to protect your captains enough, because losing your captains can hurt quite a bit. If you have a captain removed and you have to place them on the board when you're choosing your acting captain, you get 1 less action, and oftentimes that first action that you're using on your turn is just going from a forest to a clearing, so really you're now down to 2 actions if you had been removed. If a captain's removed and placed back on the board, some of those prisoners get returned, and also during the Take It Easy step, whoever has the most prisoners is able to return some as well. Now that is going to be the 3 factions, but let's talk about the 2 new maps. Now these are not going to break the game in terms of rules. Really, we just have 2 pretty awesome designs. You've got the marsh map, which is going to be kind of the 5 and 6 player map. Like I said, it has these clearings that are called flooded clearings. The expansion comes with 3 tiles that can be placed on the board, matching the symbols on them with where they're at on the board. And that will allow you to play this map with any player count, even if it's not 5 or 6. At 5 and 6, you're playing with all 15 clearings on this map. And also this expansion comes with 3 new landmarks, these landmarks giving their suit to the clearings. So these can be used as the 3 extra clearing markers for your 15 clearing games. But also they're a way to kind of open up the map a bit. They each have different abilities that kind of give more connectivity on that big marsh map. But then on the flip side, you've got the Gorge map, which is my map. And really all it is a unique design that was basically built to be a choke point disaster for a lot of factions. There is a lot of places where you can strategically put up rule in order to make the map very hard to traverse around. These large bridges give a lot of connectivity, but can also be locked down to create a lot of issues for other players. Now, how do I feel about this expansion? I think overall, this expansion is an absolutely wonderful addition to the game of Root. It is fitting that it is the 4th expansion because I would say that this one is the most complex expansion that we have gotten for the game. A lot of these factions add a lot of interactions, a lot of rules clarifications, and they're probably getting some of the most core questions that any factions have ever gotten. If you don't know, these factions were designed by Joshua Yearsley, the same designer who did the Badgers. The Badgers previously being the most complex rules-wise faction we've had in the game. Now, these factions, some of them aren't that complex rules-wise, but they are so complex to get your head around on how to score points. We've had a lot of times where I'm introducing these factions where people are just lost with the frogs, and that's the easiest faction in this box, I would say. The Knaves are the most easy to understand how to score, but mechanically they are the most complex in the game. And then the Bats are just somewhere in the middle. I would say that they are a bit hard to understand, both mechanically and also how to win with them. But they are by far my favorite of the 3, which was a very big surprise for me because originally I was thinking it was going to be the Frogs, and then when I played the Knaves and I was like, maybe it's the Knaves, and then I played the Bats and I was like, okay, I think I love the Bats even more than the other 2. But all 3 factions are good in their own right. Just keep in mind, do not play these together for your first game because there is going to be a lot of questions, like I said. All in all, I do feel this is a great expansion for a 4th expansion, but I do kind of wish that one was a little bit easier to grok. I feel like none of these are super easy to grok unless you are experienced with the game. I would love for this to have been a great 2nd expansion to get, just because it does come with so many things that would be so valuable as a 2nd expansion. And so still, I'm going to be recommending, the other picks that were usually there. And so I think that that's good, but I think that this one also had room to be the perfect 2nd expansion with the maps and the extra items and the dice. It just comes with so much stuff that would have been perfect value for a 2nd expansion. But these factions are just way too complex for a 2nd expansion. Like I said, if you're going from cats to frogs, it's like very, very different contexts. For example, every faction in the base game is just more simple than these ones. Like the simplest of this box does not fit in the complexity level of that first box. You kind of have to go through the journey of Root's factions in order to have your brain ready for these ones. I think that that's great for the highly competitive players, especially. Like that's fantastic because they're gonna understand why these are so cool. But I think it might frustrate some tables because I know a lot of people are gonna be excited that there's frogs, excited that there's bats, excited that there's skunks, and then they're gonna play these factions and be like, what is going on here? What is happening? This faction does not play the way, I can't figure them out. They're not how I expected them to be. And I think that's normal, but it is just a little sad. One other thing that I'll mention that is maybe a critique is I do wish that one of these factions had buildings, because now even more than ever, this is not a good like early expansion to get because none of them have building tokens. And I feel like it feels weird when you're playing a game with just these 3 factions to have not a single faction have buildings. Games of Root without buildings, it feels weird to me. I don't know if that's just a me thing, but if I see the squares on the board, I need something to fill those squares. It makes me feel like the game's more complete. And so this expansion, for me personally, has this feeling of incompleteness because none of these factions have buildings. I had wished that the Frogs, being the one militant faction, were able to somehow get buildings in there. And I understand, obviously, they were tested and everything to not have them. But I also wish maybe the Bats had buildings. I don't know, just one of these factions I feel like it's missing without having one of these factions have buildings. Like I said, that might just be a personal thing. I think it probably is. But at the end of the day, these factions are all very fun. And I think that that is all that matters. You just got to know what you're getting into. You're getting into a very high level root play here if you want to be good with these guys. But you're going to get some really, really fun games of Root. I would recommend, and I think the actual box recommends, that you just include one of these factions in your games at a time. I'm going to go ahead and double down on that. If you are playing this expansion, do not throw in multiple in your first game. Just do one at a time. I think that that would be the best way to start getting these factions internalized into your game group. I'm not going to make many notes on the maps. I think both maps are very fun. They have their place. Obviously, I'm super biased on the Gorge map. So I'm also really glad I didn't go into the 3 Vagabonds that they give, but they actually give 3 Vagabonds with their own unique abilities. And I'm so glad they did that because I think that's just more value for the community. For those players that are playing Vagabonds, you got 3 new awesome Vagabonds to play with. And I think that is fantastic. The battle dice, it's awesome that we're getting a new set. Now we've got 3, which is super exciting. But man, this is one of the most gorgeous expansions as well. Some of this artwork is just some of the best artwork we've ever seen. Specifically, I would say the Frogs artwork, like all of their card art, their board art. I feel like they are one of the most beautiful factions we have ever had. This is like top tier Kyle Farron art. Now, you've heard that 1,000 times. Every expansion, I'm always going to be raving about the design and the look of this game. But really, with the new Gorge map artwork, the new Marsh artwork, and all of these meeples and the art put together, like this package is just incredible. It is probably the best looking expansion we have gotten to the game. I hope that this gave some good information for you and made you decide if maybe these factions were something you were interested in picking up. If this video provided value, please do all the YouTube things. Drop a like, comment, share the video with your friends. Would love to get this video to more and more people. If you are looking for how to actually play these factions, I've got a series of how to play all 3 of these factions right here. You can go ahead and click that. And if you are looking for how to strategize and get good with these factions, I've also got videos here, a link to the playlist on how to play all 3, but how to play them well. All right, I'll see you next time. Let's go ahead and drop the beat.